Assalamu alaikum and welcome to everyone who's tuning in with us today. We appreciate that you took the time out. It shows your dedication to self-growth and improvement in preparation for the blessed month of Ramadan, and of course, Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. And to begin with, I just want to just very briefly kind of run us through what I'll be covering today and why I'm covering it in such a way. And I think it's very important to address what drives our emotions, which is really the mind. So understanding the lens through which we see the world and how it differs between each person, and how that generates emotions, and how our emotions, drive our behaviors, and which solidify later on into becoming habits. And those habits really make up our lives. And so it's very important to begin with understanding the nature of the world, the lens through which we see things. So we often hear the word emotional wellness used in self-help books, and we hear it in lectures, and we hear it in different shows. And but I just want to, identify what it is that I'm referring to here in this talk, for the sake of everyone being on the same page and understanding what emotional health and being emotionally well and sound means. So it typically refers to having a rough continuity of positive emotional states. When I look back at my life, I don't see major oscillations in my emotions typically. And of course, there will be things that we go through in life that throw us off track, throw us off the path. And some things are very unexpected, and some things were somewhat predictable. We knew, for example, in this crisis, that individuals would lose their jobs, and that may impact some of us, and being able to prepare for that. And we actually know that predictability alleviates stress, according to science. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already given us a sneak peek into everything that we will be tried with in this dunya, right? So we know that وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ, some of fear and some of hunger and loss of wealth and lives. And so we'll experience different forms of loss, and we'll experience fear and anxiety, and we'll experience sadness. But the most important thing is to not allow those emotional states to get a hold of us, right? And to grip us, and we're unable to get out of those states with ease. So that's typically what I'm referring to when I'm talking about emotional well-being, that we are able to maintain, for the most part, our composure. We're able to be like our beloved alayhi salatu wasalam, to be the eye of the storm. And all of these storms are unfolding around us, pandemics and calamities and trials and tribulations, and some of them are positive and some of them are not so positive. But we're able to remain composed and remain similar to the eye of the storm, where things are somewhat calm. We're in a state of rida, or acceptance of Allah's decree. And we know that within each trial, there are many positive lessons that we can draw from. And then there are also many things that we can learn about ourselves and others as we go through these experiences. So we know that the greatest disruptors to emotional states are ibtila'at, right? Trials and tribulations. And ibtila'at is a word that's mentioned throughout the Quran. And it typically refers to, I liken it to us being similar to vessels. And these vessels contain things. And what they contain for every single one of us are our dispositions and our personalities and our temperaments and our characteristics that differentiate us from other people and liken us to other people. And so, and throughout the Quran, we often think ibtila'at is a very negative thing. However, throughout the Quran, ibtila'at are mentioned in a positive sense before they are mentioned in a negative sense. And it's very analogous to the term Hans Selye, who coined the term eustress, which is a positive stressor, which is similar to marriage. Marriage is a beautiful thing. However, it comes with its own stressors, right? To individuals who are merging into one life, right? And how can I maintain a sense of self while I come together with this other person in which we share a life together? And how can we do that in the most harmonious way? So being similar to vessels, and it won't be until we are, there is some type of friction or some type of interaction with someone else that's beyond just a smile or a greeting. We are actually interacting more in depth with someone that I'll come to see what's inside the vessel of the other person. What is their nature? What is their disposition? What frustrates them? What maybe triggers them? What makes them joyful? And what do they anchor their worth and value in? And understanding that, through these trials and tribulations that we face, we will come to see many, many sides of ourselves. And we'll learn many things about ourselves and other people that we wouldn't have learned otherwise. And when Allah unveils, characteristics or flaws within us, that's not a bad thing, right? That's actually out of His infinite mercy and love for us, that He's directing us towards things that need a little bit of love and care, a little bit of attention, some, form of mending or some form of repair. And so when we look at it from that perspective, we won't view every negative thing that happens to us to be a huge disruption, right, in our emotional states. We'll view it as more of a positive thing that's happening to us. Now, I had said in the beginning that we would look into the nature of our mind, right? And our minds are really inclined to wonder. And it's very similar to children, and their language is energy, right? So it's very difficult to tell a child to sit still and not move, right? And we want them to complete a task or do their homework or, do something that we want them to do. And they just don't really know how to do that because that's not how, they're designed to be as children. And so very similarly, our minds, the nature of our minds is to wonder. And by default, right? So our minds are not typically focused in the present. And typically our minds will be wandering from one state to the next, right? It's also important to mention that the part of our brain that is responsible for thinking about the self, right? So thinking about me, myself, and I, and the part of the brain that's responsible for detecting errors, they're tied together. They're like right in front of one another in the brain. And so when I think about myself, you will notice that you very often think about everything that is possibly wrong with you as a person. You won't typically look at yourself from a lens of compassion and positivity. You're more so looking at all the things that are wrong with you, right? And so it's important to understand that the medial prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex are actually neighbors to one another, and they feed off of each other. And when I think about the self, I'm often thinking about errors and, the ways that things that are wrong with me and ways that I can repair those things. Now, everyone's default state looks the same in the absence of great medical conditions, like very significant medical conditions like Alzheimer's or schizophrenia, or a serious illness, right? But everyone in general, you and me and my neighbor and my friend and my loved ones, we typically have a very similar default state. And that default state is one of dissatisfaction. We are typically dissatisfied with how things are in our lives or in the world or in our relationships or in our careers. And so it then becomes understandable why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, emphasizes throughout the Quran the importance of gratitude, having an attitude of gratitude and perceiving things from a lens in which we appreciate what we have, because it could be worse. And that comparison, Allah creates things in contrast. So being able to contrast and see how other people are living is very different to how I'm living, and that my situation I should be very thankful for my situation. And it's actually much better off than a lot of people. Um, understanding the role of gratitude and why there's the wealth of information about gratitude today because of this finding of the nature of our minds and where our minds typically dwell. And that, 80% of our thoughts are typically negative in nature. And I'll get into that in a little bit. I was listening to a lecture some time ago, and the speaker was talking about the tafsir of Imam al-Ghazali for Surah al-Hujurat. And I went and I kind of did my own research after. And it's so fascinating because we often think of Ayah 6 from Surah al-Hujurat, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, in ja'akum fasiqun binaba'in fatabayyanu. And basically what that ayah is referring to, that if someone comes to us of questionable character, saying, sharing news with us or sharing something with us about something or someone that I wasn't previously privy to, that I need to verify, right? Unless I've dealt with that person, I've traveled with them and I've lived with them and I've dealt with them in monetary transactions. And those are very revealing in the sense of revealing one's character, right? You get to see what's inside of that, with their inner contents. But if I haven't dealt with someone extensively in that way, it's hard for me to really guarantee their character. And so Imam al-Ghazali states that afsaq al-fusaq, like the most corrupt being or creation of Allah, is actually shaitan. And we know that shaitan comes from the root word shatana, which is something that's like very far off from the truth or from the straight path. And so his goal, his full-time career, is to influence us into not being on the straight path and filling us with despair and sadness and fear, and not really allowing us to, appreciate the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted us. And so sometimes we're very blinded to the blessings that we are actually immersed in. And speaking to individuals who struggle, with that way, it's like a very common thing. They don't really see the good in their lives, and all they tend to see are the negatives. I don't have, this type of career the way that I wanted, or I'm unable to achieve my dreams, or I don't have as many children as I wanted to have, or I don't have any children at all. So instead of looking at what I do have, I'm constantly fixated on what I don't have. And this, as you can imagine, generates, so those thoughts that are influenced by shaitan, right, drive and generate the emotions of sadness, anxiety, and despair, and grief, right? And so I'm really unable to focus on what I need to focus on, which is وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, right? Which is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to be strong believers, strong in mind and body and emotionally, right? And so when I am filled with despair, I'm unable to recognize the blessings that Allah has bestowed upon me. I can't worship Allah adequately because I'm always, in a state of grief or, scared or very anxiety ridden. And then I can't serve others, and I can't really be a productive member of my community the way that we need to be in order for our community collectively to thrive. So keeping this in mind whenever we are thinking about our thoughts, how do we think? How do we think about things? What are our thoughts? What do we often find ourselves thinking about? And then challenging those thoughts, right? Especially before Ramadan, we really want to liberate ourselves from the influence, because we're all under the influence of shaitan. So we want to be liberated from his influence as much as possible. So a term that is used in internal family systems approach is the term tormentor. And basically, we are all in this pandemic greatly being tormented, whether it's because we are isolated with our thoughts, which is actually the biggest challenge for a pandemic such as this. People are really afraid to be with their thoughts, really afraid to be with certain individuals in their lives who they were constantly busy and running away from, and kind of distracting themselves from issues that they didn't want to face. So whether it's anxiety or loneliness or separation from loved ones, we typically tend to be immersed in all of these, flooded with all of these negative emotions. And so what torments you, however, is not always a bad thing, because what torments you teaches you. And it teaches me the hard to love places within myself, and it directs me towards areas within myself that need healing, right? So Allah, out of His mercy, again, unveils those things, and He shows me the areas in which I need to pay more attention to, and I need to heal from. Maybe I have an insecurity, in a certain area when it comes to my capabilities, and I'm constantly finding that I'm comparing myself to other people. And so Allah unveils that insecurity so that it can be something that I heal from and work on, so that I can be a more productive member of my family and community. Pay attention also to what's coming up for you at this time, especially before Ramadan comes. Are you really worried that Ramadan is going to be different, and that different equals difficult? Or are you looking at Ramadan as though it's going to be a very unique opportunity, an experience in which I can really maximize and capitalize on the fact that I'm not going to be running from one iftar to the next. I'm not going to be busy hosting iftars. I'm not going to be so occupied with going to and from work or dropping the kids off for different activities. I actually have a prime opportunity with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to really focus on cultivating emotional wellness through strengthening my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's our goal, right? That's the ultimate goal. And we may not have had that opportunity much in the past, because we are constantly going from one place to the next. So observe, step outside of yourself, and it's as though you're looking inside yourself. You're looking through a window, and as an outside observer, and you're looking in to see what I'm going to observe. What am I going to, am I really who I think that I am, right? And is my ideal sense of self so out of touch with reality? Or is it, very aligned with reality, with the way that others see me, for example? And so making sure that those two things are aligned. The way I perceive myself is aligned with the way that I really want to be. And uncertainty. So we as human beings, it's sort of a curse in a sense, but we want to always seek to control the situation. And we have become, due to being so immersed in luxury and comfort for many parts of the world. And so we've become very risk averse. We avoid risks as much as possible. And so Dr. McGonigal, and she's a top health psychologist, she's one of the top researchers for stress and health. And so she came up with like a 3-step process in facing uncertainty. And we can apply this to Ramadan being around the corner. We can apply this to this current pandemic that we're facing. And it's a really impactful process, right? And so understanding what is, we all assume different identities. We can be mothers, we can be, social workers, or we can be doctors, or we can be healthcare professionals, or we can be a homeschooling mom, or we can be a single dad who cares for his children and for his elderly parents. So whatever role it is that we assume, really acknowledging at this time which identity of mine that I assume is actually the most challenging for me, and affirming that, right? So maybe I'm not, as a single dad, I'm not used to being at home and homeschooling my kids and cooking for them and cleaning and just upkeeping with the house. And so all of that is very difficult for me. And now I have to face the identity of me as a father, and also as a disciplinarian. And I have to be all of these things for my children. And that to me is very scary, right? Because I doubt my abilities in those areas, and I've never really worked on developing my skills and my talents in those areas. And so, understanding first and foremost which identity is the most challenged in this time, and how can I affirm it? How can I tell myself that I'm doing the best that I can? And that's all that matters, right? And breaking things up into smaller tasks so that I don't overwhelm myself with larger tasks that seem to be unmanageable and invoke or elicit a lot of anxiety and sense of overwhelm and frustration within me. Now, secondly, acknowledge what's so difficult about this, right? What are you trying to avoid feeling? What is it that you're running away from, right? We had said that, prior to this pandemic, there may have been so many things in our lives that serve as distractions from things that we really should be investing in and working on. And so what are those things that we are trying to avoid facing? Is it ourselves? Is it a certain aspect of myself that I'm really trying to avoid, staring in the face and really dealing with and resolving things within me that really need to heal? And then thirdly, and shifting my focus from control, which we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the ultimate control over our lives, and shifting it more to choice. How do I choose to be at this time of global crisis? Do I choose to be a helper, or do I choose to be someone who shuts everyone out and isolates and deals with everything on my own, and missing opportunities for great ajr and a lot of growth because I'm facing my fears? So instead of facing them, I run away from them. Do I choose courage? Do I choose to be a better listener to everyone around me, so that I can be a compassionate ear and a compassionate shoulder and heart for others to find comfort in? So applying this three-step process really helps us to face uncertainty and deal with it in a more courageous way. And recognizing at the end of the day that I can do my best, but I can't do it all, right? There will be no way for me to accomplish everything. And that's where self-compassion comes in. And we often find that we are sometimes good at giving compassion. I mean, maybe not for everyone, but for the most part, we're good at giving compassion. However, we don't really know how to receive compassion from other people because it makes us feel vulnerable, and we may not be comfortable with that. But we know that our beloved, alayhi salatu wassalam, he would accept acts of compassion from other people, and he was very compassionate and merciful with others. And so that is the example that we should try to emulate in our lives. And understanding that stress makes you social. And sometimes, people may hear that and be like, what does that even mean? How can stress possibly be good for you when doctors are constantly teaching that stress is actually really bad for you and you should avoid it like the plague? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set us up to face trials and difficulties, but we also have a built-in system by which we can heal from the negative impacts of stress in our body. So oxytocin is one of our brain's neurohormones, and it's known as AKA the cuddle hormone. So when a mother is hugging her children, there's a flood of oxytocin. When two partners express love for one another, there's oxytocin at play. When you show love for family members and relatives, or individuals who are part of your community, that involves oxytocin. So our brains release oxytocin as we go through difficult experiences, and that sort of nudges you to reach out to others. If you've had a really difficult day, or if you're facing a very difficult, stressful time, to reach out to others and basically, communicate to them that you're struggling or you are having a hard time with something. And that allows the release of oxytocin to flood your system and basically serves as a protective factor in your heart not being impacted by cortisol and, all of the negative impacts that stress can have. Also, caring for others can really bring about an increased sense of resilience. And I want us to focus a little bit on this area. So identifying your refuge this Ramadan. And what I mean by that is there are external sources of refuge, and there are internal sources of refuge. And the internal sources are much more reliable, as you can imagine, than the external sources. And external sources, like, when things get tough for me in Ramadan, when I'm fasting and I'm depleted and I don't have any energy, and I'm sheltering in place and I'm on lockdown and I can't really be out and about or go anywhere or see anyone in person, what are some things that I can do? And so identifying your sources of refuge. So externally, it could be a place or a thing or a person that you identify as home, and they bring you that sense of comfort and solace. It could be a partner. It could be salah and dua, which are primary, of course, for those who are listening and who are practicing Muslims. And so, or aspiring to be practicing and strengthening your faith, this is really the time to work on that for all of us. It could be a social circle, or it could be as simple as chocolate, right? Your internal sources of refuge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And He is our direct link to the, generating positive emotions. When I think that Allah is the disposer of my affairs, handing things over to Al-Wakil, right? And handing things over to Al-Qadir, right? The one who is capable of all things, then I know that my affairs are in good hands. And it's very similar to getting in the car with someone who I fully trust and was very reliable. And I know that, of course, the outcome is in Allah's hands, but I know, that they would take good care of everyone and be responsible who's in the car with them. So it's very similar. I'm not going to be as, anxious or as fearful because I know who's steering my life, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so there's no need to fret, and there's no need to be very anxious because I know I'm in good hands. And, reflecting whenever I'm struggling on the fact that, we're all hopefully individuals who have good intentions. We have good nawaya, and we intend well for others. And so even if it's misunderstood, even if the behaviors aren't always aligned with the good intentions, which is something, to work on and strengthen. But reflecting on the fact that I have good intentions for others, and I have, good intentions within myself, in my relationship with myself. I don't try to harm myself. I'm not self-deprecating. And, I recognize that I'm worthy because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created me and because I'm here. And I have something beneficial, hopefully, to contribute. And then also focusing on the fact that we have endurance and we are individuals, and focusing on individuals who have loved each and every single one of us into being who we are today, at times in which it was hard to love yourself, but they still loved you, whether it be mentors or caregivers or siblings or friends or community members that you grew up with. No one can take that away from you. So really reflecting on those individuals who've loved you into being who you are today and who have contributed to your betterment and your improvement and your growth. And you'll never forget those individuals because they were selfless and they were thinking of you and not just themselves. And finally, to wrap up, strategies to manage our stress. And I want us to sort of just resort to, of course, the internal and external sources of refuge, understanding that, by stress making us social, it really prompts us to reach out to others and receive care and give care to others. And that helps us manage and heal from the effects of stress. And then also these four, different approaches and strategies to combat stress and the effects that it can have on us that can be harmful. The first one is being attention and centering techniques. So for us, we have the act of mindfulness, which is salah, comes from sila, which is our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can also do meditation, yoga, right? You can do visualization. And secondly, you have expressive creative strategies, such as when individuals are very anxious and, just experiencing low moods and low energy, you tend to find that there's a lot of ruminations. You're thinking and overthinking, analyzing and evaluating things, and you know, really beating the horse to death in the sense of everything that you could have possibly done wrong. And so reflecting on those things really trigger a lot of anxiety. So it causes a flare up in anxiety. And so being in your head and reflecting and contemplating may not be the best thing for you at that time when you're in one of those flare up episodes. And so it's really helpful to get out of your head and to do some gardening or to do some artwork or to do some handiwork, right? And doing some physical movement. Emotions need motion. So you need to move through what you're feeling and release them. Don't bottle them in, because it's not that they don't go anywhere. They do manifest later on into conditions and creating dis-ease in the body. And that is not something that we want, especially in the time of Ramadan, when our prime focus is worship and attaining closeness to Allah. The third is reflection and exploration. And I talked a little bit about that earlier, where we step outside of ourselves as observers looking in to see what aspects of me may need some fortification, what aspects of me need some strengthening, what aspects of me need some improvement and betterment. And I can't do that through self-loathing and hating myself. I have to do that. You can't hate things into betterment, but you can love them into betterment. And so loving yourself as a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to a point of like vanity or arrogance, wa'udhu billah, but it's more of, I know that I'm valuable and I'm of, worth to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, I'm going to observe myself compassionately and work on the areas that need strengthening within me in order to be a more productive constituent of my society. And then fourth, healthy lifestyle values, right? So, exploring more of healthy nutrition and making better ethical decisions in regards to how we grow our food, where we get our food from. Food sustainability is a huge, huge topic today that many individuals are bringing awareness to. And so at this time in which we're facing a global crisis where literally the whole world has come to a halt, we need to really pause and think about my treatment towards the earth and ways that I can better that, things that I can change, habits that I can change, practices that I can change, or that I can start implementing and incorporating in order to enhance that relationship and better the quality of life for everyone. Because I don't live in a vacuum alone. I'm in community with everyone else. And so my actions do have a ripple effect and they do impact others, and being very mindful of that. So what we do matters. And then, focusing on cultivating relationships that are healthy, especially, first and foremost with family members, and connecting with those that you may have cut off, or or loved ones or friends. Ramadan is really the time to do that, and just make sure you enter with a pure heart. And if you are unable to connect with someone, then you can at least make dua for them in your heart. And that also brings about an increase of oxytocin. And exercise. And Dr. Robert Sapolsky, he's one of the top researchers on stress. He wrote Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, which is a book that I remember reading in one of my undergrad classes. He talked about exercise having to be something that you engage in that you don't hate. So if you don't like running, then don't run, right? Because it's not going to help you de-stress. It's not going to help you unwind. It's not going to help you feel better or lose weight, because your body recognizes that you're doing something that you don't like. So engaging in something that you actually enjoy, or at least that you don't dislike, right? In order for it to be effective and have the proper impact that I want it to have on my life. And with that, I will end my presentation. And I thank you all for listening. And I'm not sure if we have any questions.
Jazakumullah khair. Thank you, Sister Heba. I don't see any questions in our chat boxes right now. But I guess because you've sort of said a lot about
Touched upon
all these,
everything. Yeah.
yeah, you've
As
done a
much as
lot,
I can.
and I think everyone
Yeah.
listening has benefited from that for sure. But and I know you may have touched upon this, but maybe is there anything that you would say is maybe more specific given the pandemic that's going on? Everyone's locked up in their houses, meaning is there anything in particular that you think would be a really good maybe internal,
Yeah, especially for Ramadan coming up. So something
right?
that we're trying to do is we printed out a prayer schedule, and we have it up on the wall. And then you know um, if you have a male in the family, they can make the adhan for each prayer, since we're all in the house together. And if you don't, then and you can be the one to make the adhan, and then just pray with whomever you're sharing space with, or with your family members.
Mhm.
And especially for Taraweeh, it is a sunnah prayer, and it is something that you can even pray on your own, but it is a good practice to just come together and feel that, try to simulate that sense of community. And so praying together is very healing, and also cooking together is also something that's really fun, and that can also be really bring about a lot of joy. And it's a very welcome distraction from everything that's happening. And also dedicating a time within each day in which you just spend time on reflection. Again, that's if you're not predisposed to having anxiety, and you're not, overthinking might really have you worked up and really anxious. But really reflecting and making it a habit to read some Quran every day, your daily litanies, like your awrad every morning and evening. That is a great source of grounding and centering for individuals. But those would be the things that really come to mind for me at this time.